The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Ashley leaned forward, disbelief written all over her face. "You're a handyman," she whispered, like it was some revelation that changed everything. "I'm a retired real estate developer," I corrected calmly. "Handyman work was just a hobby. Kept my skills sharp, stayed connected to the trades." "But you're poor," Ashley protested, gesturing at my worn truck. "You dress like it, too." Janet Harrison chuckled quietly. The truth was, my net worth was nowhere near poor. In fact, my property portfolio spanned 12 commercial buildings and 6 residential rentals across Denver, totaling millions. The neighbors were starting to murmur, piecing things together. Mrs. Chen nodded subtly, like she'd always suspected something. Margaret Harrison, ever methodical, pulled out a document. "This brings us to the current situation. Mr. Wilson, you gave Mr. Anderson 30 days' notice to vacate his own property. Is that correct?" Brad's hands shook visibly. I realized then the web of lies he had spun around himself was starting to unravel. "You also changed the locks on his personal storage area, preventing access to tools worth $50,000. Correct?" Margaret continued, her voice steady. "And disposed of my late daughter's belongings without permission," I added, feeling the weight of 7 years of memories. "Stop!" Ashley cried suddenly, panicked. "Just stop!" Brad wanted to flee, but Margaret wasn't finished. She slid a crisp, official-looking eviction notice across the table. "Congratulations, Mr. Wilson. You're being evicted from a house you never legally owned." The room erupted. Ashley hyperventilated into a paper bag. Brad stared at the notice as if it were a bomb about to go off. Neighbors whispered. Mrs. Chen muttered, "I knew something was off about that boy." I remained calm, savoring the culmination of 25 years of careful planning and protection. Margaret banged her gavel. Yes, she had a gavel. "Order! Mr. Wilson, do you understand what you've just been served?" "This can't be legal," Brad said weakly. "I live here. I have rights." "You have squatter's rights," Margaret replied coldly. "In Colorado, that requires 18 years of open occupancy and payment of all taxes and fees. You've done neither." Janet Harrison spread out a stack of bank statements. "Every expense for 1247 Maple Grove Drive, taxes, insurance, maintenance, $1.4 million invested since 1998, not including the purchase price." Brad sputtered. "But I improved the house. I put in a deck." I interrupted. "Paid by Mr. Anderson's account. Windows, plumbing, everything. Receipts and invoices confirm it." Ashley rocked in her chair. "This isn't happening! This isn't happening!" "Oh, it is," Councilman Barnes said. Sarah knew. She set this arrangement up to protect Brad's pride, to shield him from financial reality. But 7 years of charity had been repaid with arrogance, lies, and betrayal. Margaret held up a final piece of evidence, a letter from Sarah written in 2017. The words hit Brad like a hammer. "Dad, Brad's pride would be destroyed if he knew the truth. Thank you for making this possible. Please don't let him know. Love always, Sarah." Brad sat stunned. I said quietly, "She protected you for 7 years. And how did you repay that kindness? By evicting her father from his own house before her body was even cold. Brad is powerless, but how will he react in the next 30 days? Will he accept his fate, or will desperation push him to fight back?"
Ashley bolted from the room, unable to handle the reality crashing down. "I can't do this, Brad. Call me when you figure out where you're going to live," she snapped, grabbing her purse and leaving without a backward glance. Brad stayed, slumped in his chair, staring at the eviction notice like it had burned a hole through his hands. "What happens now?" he whispered, finally acknowledging his reality. Now, you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live, Margaret said, cold and precise. The same courtesy you extended to Mr. Anderson. Brad's desperation deepened. But my stuff is there. My furniture, electronics. Sarah picked them out. I paid for them with my credit card. I calmly replied, check the receipts. Everything in that house, furniture, appliances, electronics, paid for by Anderson's companies, legally recorded. Not a dime of your money. Janet Harrison tallied the totals. Furniture, $43,000. Electronics, $12,000. Art and decor, $8,000. Brad's face drained of color. I don't have anywhere to go. That's not really my problem anymore, I reminded him, using his own words from Wednesday night. 7 years of free housing is generous, not a right. Frank Rodriguez, longtime neighbor, leaned in. There's something else, Brad. Something you should know about how the community really saw your marriage. He scrolled through photos from neighborhood gatherings, block parties, community meetings, Christmas lights. Every image showed me actively helping, leading, and contributing. Everyone assumed I was the head of the household. Brad's voice trembled. You assumed wrong. No, we assumed right. You assumed wrong. Margaret's voice cut through the tension. You have 30 days to vacate. All personal belongings must be removed. Anything left behind is considered abandoned. Brad's eyes darted. What about my job? People will find out about this. Councilman Barnes leaned forward. People will find out that you've been living beyond your means, taking advantage of generosity, and repaying kindness with cruelty. You've been evicted from a house you never legally owned. Brad slumped. The confident, entitled man from the kitchen was gone. What remained was someone broken, finally facing the consequences of 7 years of ignorance and arrogance. He muttered, Tom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. I wanted to believe I was successful, in control. The truth would have interfered with that story. Margaret called the meeting to a close. Formal documentation will follow within 48 hours. As the room emptied, congratulations and handshakes were exchanged. Brad remained, silent, staring at the eviction notice. 7 years. I lived there for 7 years. Yes, I said softly. 7 years of kindness you mistook for weakness. 7 years of generosity you mistook for desperation. The ride home felt unusually long, not because of dread, but because I was finally returning to my own property, the house I had protected for 25 years. Brad didn't ride with me. He'd taken Ashley's car and was now stranded, forced to call an Uber. I had offered him a ride, but he declined, too broken to speak. When I arrived, I immediately noticed chaos inside. The for rent sign was gone, clearly canceled. Brad's belongings were strewn across the house, clothes in garbage bags, electronics unplugged, furniture in disarray. Ashley had clearly panicked while packing. My phone buzzed. Margaret. She reminded me that Brad would likely try to claim legal rights or challenge the eviction, but I was prepared. Restraining orders and immediate possession filings were ready for Monday morning, ensuring full legal protection. Then I heard a car in the driveway. Brad had returned, carrying a bottle of whiskey, looking older and more fragile than ever. Tom, he said quietly, we need to talk. No, we don't, I replied, but he begged for 5 minutes. The arrogance was gone, replaced with fear and regret. He sat heavily on the couch. I called my mom, my boss. I'm starting to realize how much Sarah protected me from the truth. I've been living a lie. Maybe if I'd faced reality sooner, I wouldn't have become this person. The truth hung heavy in the air. Brad's downfall was complete, but the lesson he was learning was profound. Brad has hit rock bottom, but will he finally learn humility and take responsibility? Or will desperation drive him to try and reclaim what was never his?
Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with a thin mist hanging over the neighborhood. I was up early, sipping coffee in the quiet of my kitchen, mentally preparing for the final act of this long, exhausting saga. Today, Brad would leave my home, the house that had been rightfully mine all along. By 9 a.m., Margaret's process server arrived with the final eviction paperwork. Brad was already outside, loading his belongings into a rented moving truck. He moved slowly, each step heavy, weighed down by 7 years of denial, arrogance, and now absolute defeat. "Tom?" he called, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard. I stepped onto the porch. He held up a small box. "I found something you should have. Sarah, she wanted you to have this." Inside was Sarah's promise ring, the one she had received for her 16th birthday. Not the engagement ring Brad had given her, but something deeply personal, symbolic of a daughter's love and trust. My chest tightened, emotions catching me off guard. "She said it was more important to her than her wedding ring," Brad added quietly. He looked older, more worn, yet somehow lighter, freed from the arrogance that had consumed him. I nodded, taking the box. "Thank you, Brad, for this and for being honest at last." He hesitated, as though weighing whether to speak further. Finally, he admitted, "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but could I send you a card on Sarah's birthday, just to let you know I'm thinking of her?" I studied his face. The desperation was gone, replaced with genuine remorse. "That would be fine," I said, "but don't expect one back. Forgiveness isn't an event, it's a process." Brad nodded slowly, the weight of his mistakes sinking in. He turned and climbed into his truck. "For what it's worth, Tom, you raised an amazing daughter. She loved you more than anything." As he drove away, I finally allowed myself a deep breath. For the first time in years, I was truly alone in my home, yet not lonely. The garden was quiet, the neighborhood still asleep, but I felt an unexpected sense of peace. My home was mine again, fully and legally, and the 7-year ordeal that had drained me emotionally and mentally was over. That afternoon, the neighbors began to trickle by. Mrs. Chen brought a casserole, a bright smile on her face. "Tom, Harold and I want to apologize. We knew something was off with Brad, but thought it was family business." "What would you have done?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied honestly. "But now we understand, and we want to celebrate your return. You've been the real head of that household all along." By evening, my backyard was transformed. The block's neighbors had rallied. Frank Rodriguez fired up the barbecue, the Morrisons brought wine, young Jake Peterson brought his guitar. Kids ran through the yard, laughter echoing where tension had once ruled. For the first time in 7 years, my home felt like a place of life and community rather than a battleground of entitlement and deceit. Jake leaned against the fence during a quiet moment. "Tom, how did you keep everything a secret for so long?" "Practice," I said with a small smile. "And a daughter who asked me to." "But weren't you angry?" he asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly, I was sad. Sad that Brad was so insecure he needed to belittle others. Sad that Sarah felt she had to protect him from the truth to preserve his ego." Mrs. Chen overheard our conversation. "What's going to happen to him?" He'll figure it out. Brad's not a bad person, just weak. Losing everything might be the only way he'll finally learn what matters. And that's the truth. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way someone can see the reality they've been blind to. Brad's entire life had been built on false assumptions, misplaced pride, and borrowed success. Now he had a chance to start fresh, honestly. As I watched the sunset from my porch, I felt a surge of gratitude, not just for my house, but for the lessons, the clarity, and the people who had remained loyal and supportive. For 25 years, I had protected Sarah's wishes, maintained my dignity, and quietly built a legacy no one else could touch. My phone buzzed constantly with messages. Margaret called Saturday morning. "Tom, 3 reporters have reached out. Your story is going viral. Hidden generosity, family dynamics, the real millionaire next door." Janet from the bank called. "The real estate world is talking about you. People are calling you the secret millionaire next door." Even Councilman Barnes weighed in. "We need experienced developers for affordable housing projects downtown. Would you consider coming out of retirement?" And just as the party began to wind down, Michelle Stevens from Channel 7 News called. "We'd like to cover your story, how you balanced generosity with boundaries and the importance of protecting one's family legacy." I smiled quietly. Maybe a print interview. Other families could benefit from knowing this story. How to handle adult children taking advantage of generosity and the importance of setting boundaries. Brad has hit rock bottom. The neighborhood knows the truth, and the media attention is growing. But can I reclaim not just my property, but my life, my peace, and my purpose while facing the spotlight?
The morning after Brad left, the house was quiet, but not empty. Sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting every corner that had been touched by both grief and hope. For the first time in years, I could breathe without tension, without the heavy presence of someone living in my home under false assumptions. I walked through each room slowly, touching familiar surfaces, the worn banister of the stairs, the corner of the kitchen counter, the hardwood floors polished by my own hands over decades. Memories of Sarah filled the air, bittersweet but comforting. She had trusted me with so much, and now it was finally mine to cherish and protect. The phone buzzed. "Margaret." "Tom, we need to talk about the media attention. It's spreading faster than I imagined. Channel 7, local newspapers, social media. People are calling you the secret millionaire next door." I exhaled, a mix of exhaustion and mild amusement. "I didn't do this for recognition," I said, "but it seems the story has a life of its own now." She laughed softly. "Well, sometimes the truth does. People are fascinated by honesty, Tom, even when it's wrapped in a mystery. And your story is compelling. Hidden wealth, generosity, family betrayal, and redemption. You've got all the elements." I nodded, realizing she was right. Stories like mine don't just capture attention, they teach lessons. Families everywhere could learn something about kindness, boundaries, and honesty. But fame wasn't my goal. Peace was. I decided to step outside. The garden, long neglected while Brad controlled every outdoor space, was a chaotic mix of weeds and overgrown plants, but it smelled like freedom. I rolled up my sleeves and began working, trimming bushes, planting new flowers, and restoring the landscape. Every snip, every turn of the soil felt like reclaiming not just the property, but my life. By mid-morning, the neighbors began trickling by. Mrs. Chen, always first to check in, waved from across the yard carrying a casserole. "Tom, Harold and I wanted to apologize again. We should have spoken sooner, but we didn't realize." "Don't worry about it.
You've been good neighbors. But we wanted to celebrate your return. You've always been part of this community, even if we didn't know the whole story." Soon, Frank Rodriguez pulled up with his truck, offering to help me clear old debris. The Morrisons brought boxes of supplies, a small gesture of solidarity. Young Jake Peterson came with his guitar, ready to play music while kids ran around the yard. Slowly, the house transformed, not just physically, but emotionally. The walls that had once felt suffocating now radiated life, laughter, and hope. As I worked, my phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages. Margaret kept me updated on every new media inquiry. A local reporter had reached out, curious about the story's human interest angle, hidden generosity, family betrayal, and how I had protected Sarah's memory while maintaining my own dignity. By afternoon, I received an email from Michelle Stevens at Channel 7 News. She wanted an interview. I hesitated. I had spent decades keeping my life private, yet I also knew the story could help others. Families struggling with similar issues might benefit from seeing how generosity and boundaries could coexist. I decided to agree, but on my terms. Print interview only. No cameras, no broadcast. She smiled knowingly. Wise choice. Control the narrative. Teach the lesson without becoming a spectacle. The interview went smoothly. I spoke about Sarah, about generosity and dignity, and about the mistakes Brad had made. Not to shame him, but to show how easily good intentions could be misunderstood or exploited. It was therapeutic, in a way, to voice these truths publicly, even if it was just to the printed page. That evening, the neighborhood gathered again, an informal block party this time. Laughter and conversation filled the air. Neighbors shared stories, memories, and even gentle advice about navigating family dynamics. For the first time, I felt fully reintegrated into the community, not as a homeowner burdened by deceit, but as a respected, trusted figure. Young Jake played guitar while kids danced and ran. Frank grilled, the smell of sizzling meat mingling with fresh flowers. I looked around and realized, like for the first time in 7 years, my home felt truly alive. It wasn't just walls and furniture. It was connection, love, and life. But as joyous as the moment was, the media attention could not be ignored. Margaret had warned me. "Tom, people are talking. Social media, the local real estate community, even city officials. Your story is resonating far beyond this neighborhood." The next day, Councilman Barnes called. "Tom, I know this is sudden, but the city's planning committee is looking for experienced developers to consult on affordable housing projects downtown. Would you consider coming out of retirement?" I thought about it. Life had been stagnant in retirement. I had wealth, but I hadn't used it for anything meaningful since Sarah passed. The idea of helping create affordable housing, of making a tangible, positive impact, sparked something long dormant. I said, "I'll think about it. I want to approach this carefully." Over the following week, I worked on restoring the house, reading legal documents related to Brad's eviction, and preparing for media inquiries. But I also began thinking about the future, not just mine, but the legacy I wanted to leave for Sarah. I decided to establish a scholarship fund in her name, aimed at supporting young people who wanted to study business or real estate development. It felt right, a way to honor her memory while empowering others. During this time, Brad attempted a brief visit. He rang the doorbell one evening, looking thinner, more tired, but somehow more grounded. I met him on the porch, careful to maintain boundaries. He said, "Tom, I hope it's okay that I came by. I said, "It's your right to ring the doorbell, but you can't come in without an invitation." He said, "I understand. I just wanted to tell you something." I stepped aside to let him speak, curious about what he might have learned from the past months. "I moved in with my mom temporarily, got a job with a smaller insurance company. Less money, but more honest work. I'm seeing a therapist, talking about why I needed to feel important all the time, why I couldn't just be grateful for what I had." I listened silently, realizing he was finally taking responsibility for his own shortcomings instead of blaming circumstances or others. "The hardest lesson, Tom, is knowing that Sarah knew. She protected me from the truth because she feared I couldn't handle it. Could I have handled it? 7 years ago? Probably not. But maybe if you'd faced reality sooner, you wouldn't have become the person who kicked a grieving father out of his own home." Brad nodded slowly. The tension in his shoulders, the arrogance that had once dominated every interaction, was gone. He had finally begun to see clearly. Before leaving, he handed me Sarah's engagement ring, the one she had worn proudly on her right hand. He said softly, "She asked me to make sure you got this back." Tears welled up in my eyes for the first time in years. "Thank you, Brad, truly." He smiled faintly, the faintest glimmer of relief in his expression. "For what it's worth, Tom, you raised an amazing daughter. She loved you more than anything." As Brad drove away, I closed the door behind me, feeling truly at peace. I had my home back, my dignity intact, and the knowledge that Sarah's wishes had been honored. The house was alive again, full of friends, laughter, and memories, not just of the past, but of the future I was ready to embrace. Over the next few months, life began to feel full and purposeful again. I reconnected with old friends from the development business, attended city planning committees, and even started dating again, a kind, understanding woman named Carol, who respected both my privacy and my accomplishments. Together, we discussed potential real estate projects, including the affordable housing initiative the city had invited me to consult on. I reviewed architectural plans, discussed budget allocations, and even visited construction sites. Each step reminded me that while life could be fragile and fleeting, impact could be lasting. The neighborhood continued to thrive around me.
The morning light spilled through the windows, warming the hardwood floors of the house I had finally reclaimed. For the first time in years, it felt like home. Not just a place to live, but a space alive with possibility. I walked through the room slowly, savoring the peace that Brad's departure had brought. No tension, no entitlement, no deception. Just clarity and quiet victory. Margaret had called early, eager to discuss the affordable housing project downtown. The city planners wanted a consultant with experience, integrity, and discretion. I fit all three, but the thought of returning to the professional world after years of retirement was intimidating. Still, something about this project called to me, not for money, not for recognition, but for purpose. Sarah would have wanted me to use my skills to make a tangible difference. Carol, the woman I had started seeing, came by mid-morning. She carried coffee and a small stack of notes. "You look lighter," she said softly, smiling, "like the weight of the world isn't on your shoulders anymore." I laughed lightly. It's true. 7 years of hidden tension finally lifted. The house is mine again, my dignity intact. And Brad, well, he's finally facing the consequences of his actions. The world feels manageable. She set down the coffee. "You ready to dive back into development? The city's counting on you." "I think I am. But this time, it's different. I'm not just building properties. I'm building impact, legacy, and opportunity for others."
The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Meetings, planning sessions, architectural reviews, and consultations became my new rhythm. For the first time in decades, I felt alive in my work, driven not by profit alone, but by the tangible good I could accomplish. Affordable housing projects, community centers, green spaces, all were carefully designed with input from residents, architects, and city officials. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to thrive. Mrs. Chen baked cookies for the block, the Morrisons hosted weekly dinners, and Jake's music lessons became small performances that drew families together. Every interaction reminded me that life wasn't about isolation or control, it was about connection. Brad's attempts to reach out were infrequent and polite. He respected the boundaries we had set. A text here, a brief message there, but always measured. He had moved to Grand Junction, found a stable job, and begun therapy. He was rebuilding his life, slowly but sincerely, and I could finally view him with compassion rather than anger. He had learned the lessons the hard way, and that alone was enough. One afternoon, as I reviewed blueprints in Sarah's old room, now my home office, my phone buzzed. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. "Tom, you're going to want to see this," she said. Curious, I opened the attached file. It was a print article from the local newspaper titled, "Secret Millionaire Next Door Turns Family Tragedy into Community Triumph." The story detailed the eviction, my long-term generosity, Sarah's efforts to protect her father, and my return to development. People were calling it an inspiring tale of integrity, generosity, and resilience. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words sink in. It wasn't about fame. It was about the lessons embedded in every choice, every act of kindness, every boundary set. Sarah's memory had guided every decision, and I could feel her presence approvingly in the room. As the weeks turned into months, life settled into a fulfilling routine. I hosted community meetings, organized small charitable events, and even started mentoring young developers who wanted to make a positive impact. Carol was by my side, helping me navigate the balance between personal life and professional obligations. Together, we planted a small garden in the backyard as a tribute to Sarah, a living space of flowers, herbs, and memories. The scholarship fund in Sarah's name began accepting applications. Young students eager to study business or real estate development applied, their letters filled with ambition and gratitude. Reviewing each one, I felt a sense of pride and purpose unlike anything I had experienced in years. This was lasting impact, a continuation of Sarah's spirit and values through the lives of others. One quiet evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and fresh grass. Carol joined me, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You've done a lot, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. The neighborhood, the city, the scholarship recipients, even Brad in a way." I nodded. It wasn't easy. 7 years of managing deceit, grief, and responsibility taught me one thing. Generosity without boundaries can be exploited, and kindness without clarity can be misunderstood. But when paired with honesty, integrity, and self-respect, it creates something lasting. She smiled. "You're not just reclaiming a house, you're reclaiming your life." I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread. "And I'm finally living it on my terms." Sarah would have been proud. The final chapter of Brad's story had closed, but the lessons lingered. I no longer worried about appearances or entitlement. I focused on meaningful relationships, purposeful work, and honoring the past without being trapped by it. Occasionally, the neighborhood asked about Brad. "Do you think he's really changed?" Mrs. Chen asked one afternoon, leaning on the fence. "I think he's learning, And that's all anyone can do. Learn, reflect, and try to do better. Life continued, steady and purposeful. I hosted community dinners, supported community projects, and even began occasional lectures on ethical real estate development. My story became a quiet inspiration for others, a reminder that generosity, integrity, and boundaries could coexist, and that true wealth is measured not by possessions, but by the lives we touch. 3 months after Brad's eviction, I stood in the backyard during a neighborhood gathering, surrounded by friends, laughter, and the vibrant life of the community I had protected and nurtured. Margaret was there, discussing architectural plans for our new affordable housing project. Carol was helping a young student with a garden layout, and Jake's music filled the air, a gentle reminder that life moved forward with creativity and joy. As I looked around, I realized the ultimate lesson of the past year. Kindness should never require sacrificing self-respect, and love should never be mistaken for weakness. That is something Sarah had taught me. Brad had shown me the consequences of ignoring it, and I had finally learned how to live by it. I raised a glass to the neighborhood, to friends, to Sarah, and to the life I had fought to reclaim. The house was alive, the memories were honored, and for the first time in years, I felt truly, undeniably at peace. Because some victories aren't about wealth or revenge, they're about reclaiming your life, setting boundaries, and living in a way that honors both the past and the future. And that was the greatest triumph of all. Life moves forward, shaped by the lessons of kindness, boundaries, and resilience. The past may test us, but true strength lies in reclaiming our dignity, honoring loved ones, and building a legacy that matters.